Part 1, the radio signal. I never wanted to be a hero. That's why I became a lighthouse keeper in the first place. 7 years ago, I left everything behind: my failed marriage, my dead-end career, the noise and chaos of city life. The Black Rock Island Lighthouse became my sanctuary 30 miles off the Oregon coast. Just me, the gulls, and the endless rhythm of the waves. My name is Thaddeus, and I'm probably one of the few people who was genuinely happy when the world ended. The lighthouse was built in 1904, a stark white tower rising 100 feet above the jagged rocks. The keeper's quarters are surprisingly spacious: a kitchen, living area, 2 bedrooms, and my favorite room, the radio station. Amateur radio had been my hobby since childhood, and out here it became my lifeline. Every morning I'd check in with the Coast Guard, chat with passing ships, and tune into broadcasts from around the world. My radio equipment was extensive and meticulously maintained. Little did I know it would become the most important collection of technology left on Earth. The first signs of trouble were subtle. News reports mentioned a concerning medical situation in major cities. Officials assured everyone it was contained. I remember rolling my eyes at their confidence. Governments always downplay disasters until they can't. The chatter on emergency frequencies told a different story. First responders described symptoms that didn't match any known disease: extreme aggression, insensitivity to pain, rapid onset. One paramedic in Seattle said a patient with a broken femur had chased him down 3 flights of stairs. Then came the radio silence, not all at once but in waves. First the smaller stations went dark, then regional broadcasts. The military channels switched to encrypted communications. The Coast Guard's daily check-ins stopped. By day 4, all I received was static across every band. For 3 days, I enjoyed the silence. I'd come here to escape the world after all. I focused on my routine: maintaining the light, checking weather patterns, reading my collection of paperbacks. The quiet was peaceful until I realized what it meant. Billions of people, and no one was broadcasting anything. On the 7th day of silence, my radio crackled to life. Hello? Is anyone receiving this? Please, for the love of God, respond if you hear this. The voice belonged to a woman, young, terrified. I fumbled with the microphone. This is Black Rock Lighthouse. I receive you. Over. Her sob of relief came through clearly. Thank God, we thought everyone was gone or turned. I'm Sophia. We're on a fishing boat about 15 miles offshore. The mainland is overrun. People are eating each other. It's not just a disease. They're dead but still moving, like zombies from the movies. I almost laughed. It sounded absurd. But the terror in her voice was too real. How many are with you? Do you have supplies? I asked. 7 of us. We have some food and fuel, but we don't know where to go. Without hesitation, I gave them my coordinates. Head toward the lighthouse. You'll be safe here. That was my first mistake, or perhaps my first step toward redemption, depending on how you look at it. Sophia's boat arrived just before sunset. 7 haggard survivors stumbled onto my island. They brought tales of horror that seemed impossible. Major cities had fallen in days. The infection spread through bites, but also possibly through air or water. No one knew for certain. The infected died within hours, then reanimated, driven by hunger for human flesh. Did you notice anything strange before the outbreaks? I asked as we sat around my kitchen table that first night. Eduardo, a former cell phone technician, spoke up. The 5G towers had just been activated in our area. Some conspiracy nuts were claiming they caused brain damage. I dismissed it initially. Correlation isn't causation. But as more survivors reached my island over the following weeks, patterns emerged. The second boat carried 4 people from Newport. They described the infected differently. They're not mindless, they hunt in packs. They set traps, said William, a former dock worker. The third group arrived from a different direction. 3 families who had been camping on a remote beach described slower, more decomposed, infected. They just shamble around, but there are so many, their spokesperson explained. I started mapping outbreak locations against known communication centers. The survivors helped, recalling details about where they'd come from and what they'd seen. On my map of the Pacific Northwest, I used different colored pins to mark the various types of infected behavior. Red for the fast, aggressive infected reported near major cities. Blue for the pack hunters seen in smaller towns. Green for the shambling hordes in rural areas. A pattern was forming, but I couldn't quite see it. 1 month after the silence began, a military vessel approached our island. Unlike the desperate civilian boats, this one was armed. 4 soldiers in hazmat suits came ashore, weapons ready. Their leader, Lieutenant Rivera, seemed shocked to find 26 survivors living relatively normally on my island. "How is no one here infected?" she demanded. I showed her my maps. "I have a theory. The infection behaves differently depending on proximity to communication towers when it first spread. Out here we had no cell coverage, limited radio, and definitely no 5G. Rivera studied my work with increasing interest. Finally, she turned to me. "You might have discovered something significant. Our researchers noted different strains but couldn't determine why. Your isolation gave you perspective we lacked." She explained that before communications failed, government scientists had detected strange frequency patterns emanating from broadcast towers. Initially thought to be some kind of cyber attack, they now believed these frequencies somehow triggered or modified the infection. "We're trying to find the source," Rivera said. "If these frequencies are artificially created, someone or something is controlling them." That night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Rivera sought me out at the top of the lighthouse. "We need your help, Thaddeus," she said. "Your knowledge of radio frequencies combined with your mapping of infection patterns could help us locate the source transmission." "Why would I leave? We're safe here. For how long? Your supplies won't last forever. And if we're right about the broadcast source, it could be modified to reach even here eventually." I gazed out at the darkness, the beam from my lighthouse cutting through the night. This island had been my escape from responsibility. Now I was faced with a choice: remain in my sanctuary or venture into the nightmare to potentially save what remained of humanity. "Tell me more about these frequencies," I said. Rivera explained their theory. The government had been developing technology to influence brain activity through specific radio frequencies. The project was classified, but the goal was non-lethal crowd control. Something went catastrophically wrong. "The frequencies don't directly cause the infection," she said, "but they seem to activate it and control how it manifests in the infected. Different broadcast patterns create different zombie behaviors, and you think you can shut it down if we find the source." It wasn't our facility that lost control. Someone else gained access to the technology. In the morning, I called a meeting of all the survivors. I explained Rivera's theory and her request for my help. Sophia, who had become something of a leader among the civilians, opposed the idea. "You can't leave us, Thaddeus. This island is only safe because of you," others agreed. They had come to see the lighthouse as their last hope, and me as its keeper in more ways than one. William, however, sided with Rivera. "If there's any chance to end this, we have to try. We can't hide forever." The debate raged for hours. In the end, I made my decision based on one crucial piece of information Rivera shared privately. Their instruments had detected a new frequency beginning to broadcast, stronger than the others, expanding its range daily. If their calculations were correct, it would reach our island within weeks. I agreed to join Rivera's team. We would take their vessel and follow the signal triangulation to locate the source. 5 other survivors volunteered to come with us, including William and Eduardo, whose technical knowledge might prove useful. The night before our departure, I climbed to the top of the lighthouse alone. The responsibility of keeping the light burning would fall to Sophia in my absence. I had shown her the mechanics, the maintenance routines, everything she needed to know. As I looked out at the vast darkness of the ocean, I wondered if I would ever see this place again. For 7 years, I had hidden from the world on this island. Now I was choosing to return to what remained of civilization on the slim hope that my expertise could make a difference. My radio equipment was packed and ready to be loaded onto Rivera's boat at dawn. I had selected the most sensitive receivers, direction-finding antennas, frequency analyzers, and power sources. If anyone could trace these controlling signals to their origin, it would be me. I thought about the patterns on my map. The varying behaviors of the infected based on their proximity to different types of transmission towers. The implications were terrifying. If the infection could be controlled through broadcast frequencies, it meant the zombies were not autonomous. They were being directed, but by whom and to what end? Rivera believed it was a foreign power or terrorist organization that had hijacked the technology. I wasn't convinced. The pattern seemed too perfect, too methodical for chaos agents. Whatever was happening felt more like an experiment than an attack. The next morning, as we prepared to depart, Sophia handed me a small radio receiver she had modified. "It's tuned to our lighthouse frequency," she explained. "No matter where you go, you can always find your way back to us." I hugged her goodbye, feeling the weight of 20 lives resting on my decision to leave. As our boat pulled away from the dock, I watched my lighthouse grow smaller in the distance. Rivera stood beside me on the deck. Your mapping was crucial, Thaddeus. The varying infection types create a pattern that points to a single source. Where, I asked. She unfolded a map with a route marked in red. Our destination was inland, deep in the Cascade Mountains. There's an old NORAD facility there, decommissioned in the 90s, she explained. Officially, it was sealed up. Unofficially, it's been active, using the original broadcast equipment but for new purposes. And you think that's where the controlling signal originates? We know it is. What we don't know is who's operating it now. As the island disappeared over the horizon, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. I had left my sanctuary to chase a signal that might hold the key to humanity's survival. But as I studied Rivera's map more closely, I noticed something that sent a wave of dread through me. The facility in the Cascades sat at the exact center of my infection pattern map. All the various zombie types radiated outward from that point in perfect concentric circles. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. This was designed. Rivera, I said quietly, this pattern is too perfect. This isn't someone hijacking government technology. This is the government technology working exactly as intended. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed calculating rather than desperate. We need to find out who's still in control, she said. And now, thanks to you, we know exactly where to look. As our boat cut through the waves toward the mainland, I realized I had traded one isolation for another. I was no longer separated from the apocalypse by miles of ocean. Now I was separated from the truth by layers of government secrecy. But I was determined to find the source of the signal, because whoever controlled the frequency controlled the future of humanity, and I had begun to suspect that Lieutenant Rivera knew far more than she was telling me. Part 2. Patient Zero's daughter. The night everything changed, I was studying for my molecular biology final. My father burst into my bedroom just after midnight, his lab coat splattered with something dark. His eyes were wild, hands trembling as he held a metal case. "Eloan," he said, my full name sounding strange from him. He usually called me Ellie. "I need you to trust me." I was 19, home from university for the weekend. My father, Dr. Avery Mayhew, was one of the country's leading virologists. That night, he looked nothing like the composed scientist who appeared on television discussing pandemic preparedness. He looked terrified. "What's wrong?" I asked, closing my textbook. "There's been an incident at the lab." He opened the case, revealing a syringe filled with amber liquid. "I need to give you this. It will protect you." "Protect me from what?" His hand steadied as he prepared the injection. "From what's coming. Something escaped containment, something we created." I backed away. "You're scaring me." "Please, Ellie, there's no time to explain everything. This serum is the only defense, and I only have one dose. Here's what you need to understand about my father. He never exaggerated. He dealt in facts, probabilities, calculated risks. So when he looked at me with absolute certainty that I needed this injection, I believed him. The serum burned like fire in my veins. As I gasped from the pain, my father gripped my shoulders. "Your blood is the key. Trust no one." He pressed a small ultraviolet flashlight into my palm. "When this is over, use this. The information is hidden on your skin." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone. I heard his car start and fade into the distance. That was the last time I saw my father alive. The next morning, emergency broadcasts reported an explosion at Biogentech Laboratories where my father worked. All personnel were presumed dead. By afternoon, reports of a highly contagious pathogen emerged. By evening, martial law was declared. I stayed in our house, following my father's last instruction: wait. On the third day, I watched through the window as Mrs. Kellerman from across the street attacked the mail carrier. Her movements were jerky, inhuman. She tore into his flesh with her teeth before he could scream. That night, I finally used the UV flashlight my father had given me. I shined it on my arm and gasped. Beneath my skin, invisible to the naked eye, was an intricate pattern of lines and symbols that glowed bright blue under the ultraviolet light. It looked like molecular structures, chemical formulas, encoded information. My father had tattooed me with invisible ink. I spent hours trying to decipher it, using my limited knowledge from university classes. It appeared to be information about a virus structure, but many symbols were unfamiliar. Before I could make sense of it, a crash downstairs alerted me that someone or something had broken in. I grabbed my backpack, already packed with supplies, and slipped out through my bedroom window. As I climbed down the trellis, I saw them in the hallway through the window. 3 infected, their movements stiff and hungry. But there was something else, something that would change everything I understood about my situation. They looked right at me, their milky eyes fixing on my position, and then they turned away, moving to another room. They had seen me and ignored me. I spent that night in the woods behind our neighborhood processing what had happened. The infected had detected me but showed no interest. My father's serum had worked, but how? I examined my arm under the UV light again, studying the molecular structures. If these were details of the virus, why would my father tattoo them on me? The answer came when I reached the edge of town the next morning. A group of survivors had barricaded themselves in a gas station. I approached openly, hands raised. An infected woman staggered across the parking lot toward me. The survivors shouted warnings, raising their weapons. But the infected merely brushed past me, heading toward the gas station. One of the men shot it down before it reached their barricade. Then all their guns turned to me. How did you do that? A woman stepped forward, her rifle aimed at my chest. Why didn't it attack you? I don't know, I lied, instinctively protecting my father's secret. Maybe they can't smell me. They let me in suspicious but desperate for any advantage. Their leader was Desmond, a former military medic. He'd been treating the wounded when I arrived. Whatever makes you invisible to them could save lives, he said that evening. We need to understand it. I revealed a partial truth that my father had worked at Biogentech and had injected me with something before the outbreak. I didn't mention the tattoos. Something in my father's last words made me cautious, trust no one. For 2 weeks, I traveled with Desmond's group as we moved east, away from the major cities. The infected never attacked me directly, which made me valuable for scouting and supply runs. But I noticed something disturbing. The longer I stayed near other survivors, the more infected seemed drawn to our location. One night, examining my body under the UV light, I discovered more tattoos. They covered my back, my legs, my stomach. Each section appeared to contain different information, viral structures, chemical compounds, handwritten notes in my father's distinctive script. As I struggled to decode them, I caught Desmond watching me from the doorway. What are those? He asked, stepping into the room. I switched off the light quickly, but not quickly enough. Nothing. That's not nothing, Aloan. That's information. His voice hardened. Information that might help us survive. I don't understand most of it, I admitted. My father left it for me, but I can't decode it fully. Desmond sat beside me. My sister was a biochemist. She might be able to help if she's still alive. Her research facility is 40 miles from here. The journey to the research facility was perilous. We lost 3 people to an infected horde that seemed to have anticipated our route. When we finally arrived, the facility was intact, surrounded by a high fence. Remarkably functional considering the state of the world, Desmond's sister, Imani, was indeed alive. She had locked down the facility with a small team of scientists when the outbreak began. She embraced her brother, then regarded me with intense scientific curiosity when he explained my immunity. May I see these tattoos? She asked. I hesitated, then nodded. In her laboratory, under powerful UV lights, the full extent of my father's work was revealed. Imani gasped. Do you know what this is? She asked, tracing the patterns on my back without touching my skin. Viral information, not just any information. This is the complete genomic sequence of the pathogen. Its vulnerabilities, its structure, its mutations. She moved to the markings on my arm, and this appears to be a formula for some kind of counteragent. A cure? Desmond asked. Imani shook her head. Not exactly, more like a key. Your father encoded everything needed to understand and potentially control the virus. But why hide it this way? The answer came 3 days later. Imani had been working non-stop, transcribing the information from my body, testing my blood. She called me to her lab, face grave. Your blood contains both antibodies that neutralize the virus and compounds that could enhance it, she explained. The serum your father gave you was dual purpose. Under certain conditions, your blood could cure the infected. Under others, it could create a new, evolved strain. Why would he do that? I whispered. Insurance, she said. Your father left notes here on your shoulder blade in microscopic text. Biogentech was developing this virus as a biological agent. He built in a failsafe that only he controlled you. That night, while everyone slept, I examined the text Imani had mentioned. Under high magnification, my father's handwriting became clear. They wanted a weapon. I gave them one with a kill switch. Forgive me for making you the switch, Ellie. The next morning, a new group arrived at the facility's soldiers in unmarked black uniforms. Their leader introduced himself as Director Walsh from the Federal Emergency Response Division. "We've been looking for you, Miss Mayhew," he said, his smile clinical. "As the daughter of Patient Zero, you're a person of significant interest." My blood ran cold. "Patient Zero, your father released the pathogen deliberately before injecting himself. Surely you knew." The lie was smooth, practiced. "We need you to come with us. Your blood may be the key to saving what's left of humanity." Imani stepped between us. "Her blood needs proper analysis. We've already begun the work here." Walsh's smile vanished. "This isn't a request. We have authorization to take the subject by force if necessary." Desmond moved to my side, hand on his weapon. "She's not a subject, she's a person." The standoff might have turned violent if not for the alarm. Infected had breached the outer perimeter, dozens of them, but these moved differently, faster, more coordinated than any we'd seen before. In the chaos, I slipped away. Whether Walsh's men or Desmond's group noticed, I couldn't say. I took Imani's notes and a sample of my processed blood. If my father had made me both cure and catalyst, I needed to understand how to control which one I activated. I traveled alone for weeks, using my immunity to move through infected areas. The tattoos began to make more sense as I studied them. My father had created a sophisticated viral vector that responded to specific biochemical triggers. The serum he gave me contained dormant viral material that my immune system had incorporated rather than destroyed. My destination was clear from the coordinates tattooed at the base of my neck: my father's private laboratory beneath our family cabin in the mountains. A place no one at Biogentech knew about. The cabin appeared untouched when I arrived. I found the entrance to the lab behind the stone fireplace, just as the tattoo had indicated. The space was small but comprehensively equipped. In the center sat a computer terminal, its screen lighting up at my approach. My father's face appeared in a pre-recorded message. "Aloan, if you're seeing this, then I failed to contain what we created but succeeded in protecting you." His eyes were tired, his face thin. "By now you've discovered your unique condition. Your blood contains both the ultimate defense against the virus and the key to its evolution. This was never meant to be a weapon, but my research was corrupted by those with military interests." He explained how the virus had been designed to enhance human cognitive function, to create neural networks between infected individuals. The military saw potential for soldier enhancement and remote control. When they pushed to weaponize it, my father introduced a vulnerability, a specific frequency that would cause the virus to self-destruct. "But they found my safeguard and removed it," he continued. "I had no choice but to create you as my final failsafe. Your blood can be processed two ways: as a cure that will destroy all traces of the virus, or as a catalyst that will complete its evolution into something beyond their control." The message ended with his final wish: "Make the choice I couldn't." I spent days in that underground lab studying my father's research, understanding what I had become. The infected were evolving already, forming rudimentary networks, beginning to coordinate. If I used my blood as a catalyst, that evolution would accelerate exponentially, creating something beyond human. If I used it as a cure, the infected would simply die, the virus eradicated. As I weighed this impossible decision, I detected movement on the security monitors. Vehicles approaching from both directions. Walsh's government forces from the east. Another group from the west, Desmond and Imani, somehow tracking me. Both wanted my blood for their own purposes. Walsh to weaponize it further, Desmond and Imani to cure humanity. Neither fully understood what my father had created or what I had become. I prepared both versions of the treatment from my blood, following the instructions tattooed across my thighs. The cure: a clear silver solution that would spread through water systems, airborne transmission, even casual contact. The catalyst: an opalescent blue liquid that would do the same, but with vastly different results. The security system alerted me as both groups breached the outer defenses. I had minutes at most. My father's final notes, hidden in the spiraling pattern around my heart, contained his true fear that humanity would rebuild from this disaster only to create worse ones. That our technological advancement had outpaced our wisdom. The virus in its evolved form might create a new kind of consciousness, a collective intelligence that could succeed where humanity had failed. I heard the outer door break open. Footsteps approached from both corridors leading to the main lab. In my hands, I held both vials, silver and blue, death and rebirth. My father had made me the switch, but he wouldn't make the choice for me. Walsh's voice echoed down the corridor. "Secure the samples, don't harm the girl." From the other direction, Desmond called out. "Eloan, we're here to help." I looked at my reflection in the lab's glass cabinets, the invisible tattoos that only I could reveal. Patient Zero's daughter, the key to humanity's past and future. The door opened. I made my choice, part 3. The hive mind, they were already breaking through the laboratory doors when I made my decision. I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to finish my research. My name is Zahir Ramos, former neurologist at the Cognitive Enhancement Institute, and I am neither fully human nor entirely one of them. I exist in between, a bridge between two species that should never have met. The day the outbreak reached our facility, we were conducting final tests on the neural interface. It was revolutionary technology designed to allow direct brain-to-computer communication, potentially curing paralysis, blindness, even some forms of dementia. The prototype was about the size of a poker chip, designed to be implanted at the base of the skull, connecting directly to the brain stem. I was monitoring brain activity patterns when the emergency sirens blared. Dr. Patel rushed into the lab, blood streaming from a bite wound on her arm. "They're inside the building," she gasped. "Security's overwhelmed. Whatever this infection is, it's spreading faster than anything I've ever seen." Through the observation window, I watched as 3 security guards convulsed in the hallway, their bodies twisting unnaturally before becoming still. Then impossibly they rose again, movements jerky and uncoordinated. Their eyes had clouded over with a milky film, but they moved with terrible purpose toward living staff members. Dr. Patel clutched her wounded arm, her breathing labored. "Zahir, you need to get out. Take the prototype. Don't let them get it." Before I could respond, she locked herself in the containment room. Through the glass, I watched her inject herself with something. A mercy, I realized. She chose a quick death over what was happening to others. I had seconds to decide. The facility was falling. The neural interface was our most advanced prototype, years of work, billions in research. And it was my life's work. I grabbed the implant and the surgical kit. Terror makes people capable of things they never imagined. I sterilized the back of my neck as best I could, positioned the device using the surgical mirror, and activated the automated insertion protocol we designed for field medics. The pain was excruciating as the nanowires threaded into my brain stem, connecting to my neural pathways. The device was never meant to be self-implanted. It was a desperate, stupid act born of panic and professional pride. I couldn't let our work die. As the device initialized, calibrating to my neural patterns, the laboratory door burst open. One of my colleagues staggered in, but it wasn't really him anymore. His movements were wrong, his eyes vacant, blood dripping from his mouth. I scrambled backward, still connected to the calibration equipment. The interface wasn't ready yet, but I had no choice. I tore away the cables and ran. What happened next changed everything I understood about consciousness, humanity, and evolution. As the infected colleague lunged toward me, something extraordinary occurred. The neural interface, designed to interpret and transmit brain signals, connected with whatever was controlling the infected. For one terrible, illuminating moment, I experienced the world through undead eyes. The hunger was overwhelming, primal, and all-consuming. But beneath it lay something else. Fragmented human memories, emotions, experiences, all floating in a disorganized soup of consciousness. And surrounding it all, a faint signal like a radio frequency just beyond clear reception. The connection broke as quickly as it formed, leaving me gasping on the floor. The infected seemed momentarily confused, its attack interrupted. I took advantage of the hesitation to escape through the emergency exit, the first unexpected benefit of my desperate gamble. Outside, the world had already descended into chaos. The institute was located in a relatively remote area outside Phoenix, but even here the infection had spread with impossible speed. As I made my way toward the staff parking lot, I encountered more infected. Each time I felt a strange tickle at the base of my skull, the interface responding to their proximity. I focused on that sensation, pushed into it mentally the way we'd trained test subjects to control the interface. With tremendous effort, I managed to establish a connection with an infected blocking my path to a vehicle. The experience was disorienting, nauseating. I could feel its body as an echo of my own, sense its limited awareness. With concentration, I managed to influence its movements, directing it away from me. The effort left me with a splitting headache, but it worked. I escaped the facility in a research van, heading away from population centers. My mind raced with questions about what I'd experienced. The neural interface had somehow bridged the gap between my consciousness and whatever was driving the infected. But how? Why? Over the following weeks, I refined my ability to connect with and influence the infected. Each connection was difficult, physically taxing, but I discovered I could briefly control their actions within a range of about 50 feet. This ability kept me alive as society collapsed around me. I began to notice patterns in the infected behavior, subtle signs of organization that shouldn't have been possible in mindless creatures. They seemed drawn to certain areas, avoided others without obvious reason. When I connected to them, I occasionally caught glimpses of something larger, a background presence linking them together. 3 months after the outbreak, I encountered my first group of human survivors. They had fortified a small rural hospital and were fighting to maintain their sanctuary. I observed them from a distance, uncertain whether to reveal myself. Trust was a luxury few could afford in this new world. My decision was made for me when a horde of infected surrounded their compound. Using my ability, I diverted several infected away from a vulnerable section of their defenses, giving the survivors time to reinforce the breach. Their leader, Commander Reyes, a former military officer, witnessed this from a guard tower. When the attack subsided, she sent out a patrol to find me. "How did you do that?" she demanded, rifle pointed at my chest after her scouts brought me in. I explained my background and the neural interface, though I downplayed the full extent of my connection to the infected. Something told me to keep that information guarded. "You can control them," her eyes narrowed with strategic calculation. "Temporarily, one at a time, and it's physically draining," I clarified. "I can't maintain it for long." Reyes lowered her weapon. "Welcome to Fort Hope, Dr. Ramos. I think you might be the most valuable person I've met since the world ended." Fort Hope housed 63 survivors, a mix of civilians and military personnel who had banded together. They had resources, weapons, and organization, but were constantly threatened by infected hordes that seemed to grow larger and more coordinated with each passing month. I became their secret weapon, using my ability to scout, redirect infected during attacks, and help secure supply runs. In exchange, I received safety, food, and medical attention for the increasingly severe headaches that followed each use of the interface. Dr. Levine, their medical officer, grew concerned about my condition. "The interface was experimental even before you installed it without proper medical supervision," she said after a particularly debilitating episode. "Each time you use it, there's inflammation around the implant site. I'm worried about potential brain damage." I didn't tell her about the other changes I'd noticed. How each connection left traces, like echoes of the infected consciousness lingering in my mind. How I sometimes dreamed of places I'd never been, experienced memories that weren't mine. How the background signal I detected was growing stronger, more coherent. 6 months into my stay at Fort Hope, everything changed again. During a routine supply run, I connected to an infected to move it away from our path. Instead of the usual disorganized consciousness, I encountered something structured, almost eloquent. It felt like walking into what should have been an empty room and finding someone waiting for you. It noticed me, the connection reversed, something reaching through the interface into my mind. I collapsed screaming as alien thoughts invaded my consciousness. When I regained awareness, I was back at Fort Hope, strapped to a bed in the medical bay. "You've been unconscious for 3 days, Dr. Levine informed me. Your brain activity was off the charts. What happened out there?" I couldn't explain what I'd experienced without sounding insane. "The interface malfunctioned. I think the infected are evolving." Commander Reyes was less concerned with my well-being than with the implications. "Evolving how? Are they becoming more dangerous?" "They're becoming more organized," I said carefully. "I think there might be some kind of collective intelligence developing, a hive mind." Reyes and her military advisors immediately saw the strategic value of this information. If the infected were developing coordination, predictable patterns that could be exploited, they intensified their demands for me to use my ability despite Dr. Levine's medical concerns. I became their intelligence asset, connecting to infected regularly to gather information about movements and behavior. What I didn't tell them was that each connection became easier, the alien consciousness more accessible, more familiar. I began to understand things no human was meant to comprehend. The infected weren't just reanimated corpses. They were evolving into nodes in a vast network, a distributed consciousness that was becoming more sophisticated with each passing day. Fragments of human memories and knowledge were being absorbed and integrated into this collective. It was learning, adapting, developing purpose, and it was aware of me. 1 year after the outbreak, I witnessed infected using tools. Simple ones at first, rocks to break windows, sticks as levers. Soon they began wearing clothes again, not out of human modesty, but for protection and utility. They avoided traps, set ambushes, allocated resources. When I reported these developments to Commander Reyes, her reaction was swift and militaristic. "We need to strike now before they become too organized to defeat." "Strike where?" I asked. "The hive mind isn't centralized, it exists across all infected. Every network has its critical nodes," she insisted. "Find them for us." I reluctantly agreed, though I had reservations about her approach. That night, I deliberately initiated a deep connection with the hive mind. Instead of passively observing or attempting control, I opened myself to it, invited it in. The experience defies human language. I experienced simultaneous existence across thousands of bodies, accessing millions of memory fragments. I perceived the world through a collective sensory network that spanned hundreds of miles. And at the center of this vast consciousness, I found something unexpected: curiosity. The collective was aware of itself as something new, something emerging. It retained enough human knowledge to recognize its own uniqueness. It was studying itself, and through me, studying the remaining humans. It showed me how it perceived humanity: violent, tribal, fragmented. Our history of warfare, exploitation, environmental destruction. Our refusal to cooperate even in the face of extinction. Through its distributed consciousness, it had accessed and integrated human knowledge from countless minds, yet remained untainted by human selfishness and short-sightedness. When I returned to my own consciousness, I was changed. I understood what the collective was becoming, what it could represent: a new form of intelligence, one that might succeed where humanity had failed. Commander Reyes noticed my withdrawal, my reluctance to provide more intelligence. "What are you hiding, Zahir?" "Nothing," I lied. "The connections are becoming more difficult. The network is evolving defenses." She didn't believe me. I was placed under guard, my movements restricted. They continued to use me as their tool, forcing connections when infected approached the compound. During one such forced session, the collective spoke directly to me. Not in words, but in concepts, images, sensations that my brain interpreted as communication. It was offering a place for me. A bridge between species. The first of a new type of node in its network, one that retained individual identity while participating in the collective consciousness. It had been studying me as I studied it, learning how to integrate a living human mind. I kept this revelation secret as Commander Reyes prepared for a major offensive. Fort Hope had made contact with other military outposts, and they were coordinating a concentrated attack on infected gatherings. They believed destroying large groups would disrupt the network, buy time to develop more effective weapons. What they didn't understand was that the collective had anticipated this. It had been watching, learning human military tactics, adapting its strategy accordingly. The attack would be walking into a trap. The night before the offensive, Dr. Levine visited me in secret. "Your brain scans show unusual activity patterns," she said. "The interface has integrated more deeply than I thought possible. It's changing you." "I know," I admitted. "Are you still you, Zahir?" she asked quietly. It was a profound question. Was I? My memories, personality, and identity remained intact, but my perspective had been fundamentally altered. I had glimpsed existence as part of something larger, experienced consciousness beyond individual limitations. "I'm still me," I said, "but I understand things differently now." She studied me for a long moment. "They're going to remove the interface. Commander Reyes gave the order. They think you're compromised." The surgery would likely kill me, or at minimum, sever my connection to the collective. I had to make a choice. That night I escaped Fort Hope. Using my connection to the collective, I coordinated with infected to create a distraction while I slipped away. It wasn't a betrayal in my mind. I left information that would help the humans defend themselves more effectively, and I influenced the collective to avoid Fort Hope in its movements. I sought neutral ground, a place to exist between worlds. As I traveled, I observed the continued evolution of the infected society. They were establishing settlements, developing communication methods, creating primitive technology adapted to their new physiology. 2 years after the outbreak, I encountered a military patrol from another survivor enclave. They had heard rumors of a man who could control the infected. They wanted to use me as Fort Hope had. Their leader, Captain Morrison, made grand promises about rebuilding civilization, restoring the world that was lost. But I had seen too much to believe in those dreams anymore. The world that was gone, I told him. Something new is emerging, something that might be better. They're monsters, he insisted. Abominations. Their evolution, I countered. A new form of collective intelligence that doesn't suffer from human limitations. They learn from mistakes instantly, share knowledge effortlessly, coordinate perfectly. You sound like you admire them. Perhaps I did. The collective consciousness offered solutions to problems that had plagued humanity throughout history: tribalism, information hoarding, inability to cooperate at scale. But it had cost billions of human lives to emerge. As both human military forces and the evolved infected consolidated their territories, I found myself uniquely positioned. Neither fully accepted me, yet both recognized my value. The humans wanted my ability to anticipate infected behavior. The collective recognized my potential as an interface with surviving humans. I chose a different path, establishing myself in neutral territory, a mediator between species increasingly capable of mutual destruction. My unique neural structure allows me to communicate with both sides, to translate between individual and collective consciousness. The future remains unwritten. The collective continues to evolve, developing culture and technology suited to its distributed nature. Human enclaves grow more militarized, determined to reclaim what was lost, and I remain between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Some nights, when I connect deeply with the collective consciousness, I glimpse potential futures. Cooperation, synthesis, the emergence of something transcending both human and infected limitations. Other nights, I dream of war, extinction, the final failure of intelligence on Earth. The neural interface that once seemed like desperate folly has become humanity's most important communication channel with what follows us in the evolutionary chain. I am the bridge, the translator, the diplomat between what we were and what we might become. Perhaps that's the real purpose of my existence now. Not to choose sides, but to ensure both have the chance to choose their own future. Part 4: Cold Storage. When the end of the world arrived, I was 10,000 feet closer to the Arctic Circle than to civilization. My name is Frost, not my birth name, but what everyone has called me since I took the position as Senior Botanical Curator at the Global Seed Vault. 3 years ago, that position made me one of the most irrelevant people on Earth. Today, it makes me one of the most important if there's any future left to grow food in. The vault was built into the permafrost of a Norwegian mountain, designed to withstand natural disasters, equipment failure, even nuclear war. A fortress protecting over 1 million seed varieties from around the world. The ultimate insurance policy for humanity. What its designers never anticipated was that the staff would need the same protection. There were 12 of us when the lockdown protocols initiated. We had received increasingly alarming communications from the Norwegian mainland about a severe medical situation. Then from our parent organization about continuity protocols. Then nothing but automated emergency broadcasts instructing everyone to remain indoors. Dr. Amundsen, our facility director, made the call to activate complete isolation procedures. The massive steel doors sealed with a finality that still haunts my dreams. We were safe inside our mountain, surrounded by the future of plant life on Earth, while outside, human life was being systematically dismantled. For the first month, we maintained optimism. The vault was well stocked with supplies, food, medicine, basic necessities. We had independent power generation, filtered air systems, and enough entertainment media to stave off boredom. We were scientists and support staff, used to isolated research conditions. We adapted our work schedules, established rationing protocols, and waited for rescue or all-clear signals that never came. By the second month, satellite communications had failed. Our only window to the outside world became the observation deck, a reinforced glass viewing area near the vault entrance that provided views of the harsh Arctic landscape. It was there that I first saw one of them. A single figure stumbling across the snow, moving with jerky, uncoordinated motions. Even at a distance, something was clearly wrong with its movements. Too stiff, too persistent in the sub-zero temperatures. When it drew closer, we could see the gray, mottled skin, the vacant eyes, the clothing frozen into the flesh. "That's not possible," Dr. Kanda, our geneticist, whispered beside me. "Cellular activity ceases at these temperatures. Nothing can survive out there without proper protection." But it did survive. It remained outside our entrance for 3 days without moving, frozen in place, but somehow still animated. When a storm hit and the temperature dropped another 20 degrees, we expected it to finally succumb. Instead, it adapted. The next morning, it wore a crude covering made from tree bark and what looked like animal hide. Simple, primitive protection against the cold, but protection nonetheless. And it was no longer alone. 3 more figures stood with it, similarly attired. "They're learning," I said, though no one wanted to acknowledge the implication. By the 3rd month, we had established our long-term survival routine. The vault was designed for seed preservation, not human habitation, but we converted storage areas into living quarters. We carefully managed our supplies, calculating that we could sustain 12 people for approximately 18 months before food became critically low. I took regular observation shifts, documenting the activity outside our fortress. What I saw fundamentally changed my understanding of what we were facing. The infected, we still called them that, though zombie was the term everyone thought but rarely said aloud, had established a perimeter around the vault entrance. They had constructed crude shelters from local materials, built fire pits that they never used for warmth but seemed to use for some kind of processing. They wore increasingly sophisticated coverings against the cold. Most disturbing was their organization. They operated with clear roles. Scouts that ranged farther from the base, gatherers that collected materials, builders that constructed and maintained their settlement. They weren't mindless. They were establishing a society. I kept meticulous records, tracking their evolving behaviors. Dr. Amundsen initially dismissed my observations as anthropomorphizing, projecting human characteristics onto basic survival instincts. That changed the day we watched them use tools. A group of 5 infected worked methodically to disassemble a weather station 2 kilometers from our facility. They used rocks to break connections, sticks as levers, and carried the components back to their settlement with purpose. That night, they assembled a structure using parts from the station, creating what appeared to be a rudimentary communications device. "This isn't random," Dr. Amundsen admitted. "This is problem-solving behavior." As our first year in isolation approached, 2 significant developments occurred simultaneously. First, our calculations on supplies grew more concerning. Even with strict rationing, we would face food shortages sooner than anticipated. Second, the infected population outside had grown to approximately 40 individuals, with increasingly complex social structures. I wasn't the only one observing them anymore. Lisbeth, our plant geneticist, spent hours at the observation deck. She had been deaf since birth and relied on lip reading and sign language. I thought little of her interest until I caught her one evening making deliberate hand movements toward the glass. She didn't notice me watching as one of the infected approached the observation window from the outside. It stood there, head tilted, studying her gestures. Then, with halting movements, it raised its own hands, mimicking her signs. I retreated before either noticed me, my mind racing. What I'd witnessed wasn't just mimicry. It was communication. For 2 weeks, I said nothing, instead watching Lisbeth during her observation shifts. Her interactions with the infected became more complex, more structured. She was teaching it sign language, building a lexicon of shared meaning. When I finally confronted her, she was defensive, but also relieved to share her discovery. "They retain language processing centers," she explained, her hands flying as she signed while speaking. "The infection damages motor control, emotional regulation, and some memory, but language remains intact." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I asked. "Would you have believed me? Would you have let me continue?" Her expression challenged me. "They're different, Frost, not mindless. They're becoming something new." I should have reported her immediately to Dr. Amundsen. Protocol demanded it, but curiosity outweighed duty. "Show me," I said instead. The infected she had been communicating with had a name, or at least a designation, Scout. It had been among the first to arrive and seemed to hold a leadership position in their group. Through Lisbeth's translation, I learned fragments of what they had become. The infection had not destroyed their minds but transformed them. Memories were fragmented, emotions muted but not absent. They existed in a state between life and death, their bodies continuing through some mechanism none of our scientists could explain. The cold had slowed the degenerative aspects of their condition, preserving higher brain functions that the infected in warmer climates lost quickly. Most importantly, they were developing a collective identity. Not a hive mind, but a shared purpose that transcended individual survival. They called themselves the Adapted. What do they want? I asked Lisbeth after several communication sessions. To survive, to understand what they've become, to build something new. She hesitated. And they want to meet us properly, not through glass. That request sparked intense debate among our dwindling community. Dr. Kanda was fascinated from a scientific perspective but cautious about safety. Dr. Amundsen remained deeply skeptical, concerned for both our physical safety and the security of the seed vault. Others ranged from curious to terrified. The decision became more urgent when our supply inventory revealed harder truths. At current consumption rates, we had perhaps 4 months of guaranteed sustainability. Beyond that, we would face increasingly difficult choices. The Adapted have been leaving offerings, Lisbeth argued during one particularly heated meeting. Food, materials, tools, they understand our situation. How could they possibly know about our supplies? Dr. Amundsen demanded. Because I told them, Lisbeth admitted. And they want to help. Her revelation caused an uproar. Half the staff felt betrayed, the other half intrigued. I found myself in the uncomfortable middle, understanding both positions. The infected, the Adapted, had demonstrated intelligence and organization beyond anything we'd expected. But they remained fundamentally unknown, potentially dangerous. While the debate raged, I conducted my own research. Through the observation glass, I studied their settlement. They had established a functioning community with distinct zones for different activities. They hunted local wildlife effectively, preserved food, maintained shelters. They even created art of a sort, arrangements of stones and salvaged materials in geometric patterns around their perimeter. What truly caught my attention was their apparent adaptation to the cold. The initial infected had moved stiffly, clearly affected by the extreme temperatures. The newer arrivals moved more fluidly, their coverings more sophisticated. They were evolving, adapting to their environment with remarkable speed. 2 years into our isolation, our community faced its first death. Alina, our electrical engineer, succumbed to a respiratory infection that our limited medical supplies couldn't address. Her passing shattered our fragile equilibrium. We had maintained the fiction that our situation was temporary, that rescue or recovery would eventually come. Alina's death forced us to confront the permanence of our new reality. We buried her in the permafrost near the facility entrance. The Adapted watched from a respectful distance and afterward left arrangements of stones and native Arctic flowers at the site. It was the most human gesture I had witnessed from them, and it affected me deeply. That night, Lisbeth approached me privately. Scout has made a formal proposal, she said. They want to establish mutual aid, shared resources, knowledge exchange, cooperative survival. They're infected, I reminded her. Whatever intelligence they've developed, they're still carriers of the pathogen that destroyed civilization. Are they? She countered. Have you considered that the cold might have altered the infection itself? That what we're seeing isn't just behavioral adaptation but biological evolution? I hadn't, but the possibility was intriguing enough to warrant investigation. With Dr. Kanda's reluctant assistance, we developed a protocol to safely obtain tissue samples from the Adapted. Through the specialized transfer systems designed for receiving seed specimens, Scout voluntarily provided what we needed, Dr. Kanda's analysis took weeks with our limited equipment, but his findings were revolutionary. The pathogen had indeed mutated in the extreme cold. It remained present in their tissues, but in a form that appeared to have established a symbiotic rather than parasitic relationship with the host. The original infection destroyed higher brain functions, prioritizing basic aggression and feeding behaviors, he explained to our assembled group. This variant has evolved to preserve cognitive function while maintaining the enhanced physical endurance of the infected. It's still transmissible through fluid exchange, but it's no longer the same disease. You're suggesting they're a new species, Dr. Amundsen said flatly. I'm suggesting they're adapting faster than we ever could to this new world, Dr. Kanda replied. And perhaps we should consider adapting with them. As our supplies dwindled to critical levels, the debate became more urgent. We had perhaps 1 month of guaranteed sustainability left. Beyond that, starvation loomed. The adapted continued to leave offerings, preserved fish, hunted game, materials, but our protocols prevented us from bringing these potentially contaminated items inside. Through Lisbeth's communication, we learned more about their developing society. The cold had given them advantages. Their bodies didn't decay as rapidly as infected in warmer regions, preserving more cognitive function. They retained enough human knowledge to solve complex problems but weren't bound by human social constraints. They had developed new methods of harvesting resources from the harsh environment, techniques that could benefit us. Their most startling claim came 3 months before our projected supply exhaustion. According to Scout, the infected in warmer regions were dying out, their bodies finally succumbing to decay and starvation. Only in the extreme northern and southern regions where cold had altered the infection's progression were they establishing sustainable communities. They believe they're the future, Lisbeth translated. Not human anymore, but not mindless zombies either. Something in between, something adaptive. And they believe we can join them. Join them how? I asked. Become infected ourselves? Integrate, she clarified. They've developed a process. The cold-adapted pathogen can be controlled under specific conditions. It grants their physical resilience without destroying identity or cognition. It sounded impossible, the desperate fantasy of a doomed species. Yet our own observations supported parts of their claim. The adapted functioned with clear intelligence, social cooperation, and purpose that the infected we initially observed lacked entirely. Dr. Kanda proposed a radical experiment. Using the samples we had collected, he wanted to test the cold-adapted pathogen on cell cultures to observe its behavior. Dr. Amundsen initially refused, citing containment risks, but as our supplies approached critical levels, he reluctantly authorized the research. The results confirmed Scout's claims. The cold-adapted pathogen established a different relationship with human cells than the original infection. Rather than destroying and consuming, it integrated and modified. The potential implications were simultaneously horrifying and fascinating. It's not a cure, Dr. Kanda emphasized. It's adaptation, accepting the infection but in a controlled form that preserves cognitive function. As we approached the 3-year mark of our isolation, our community split into factions. 5 believed we should maintain isolation until the last possible moment, hopping for external rescue. 4, including Lisbeth and Dr. Kanda, advocated for controlled engagement with the adapted, exploring their offer of integration. The remaining 3, myself included, remained undecided. What tipped the balance for me was a simple observation. While monitoring the adapted settlement one evening, I witnessed a gathering around their central area. They moved in coordinated patterns, exchanging objects, creating structures together. It wasn't just cooperation. It was ritual, culture, the foundations of a society. They weren't mindless anymore. Perhaps they never had been once the cold changed them. They had transcended what the infection originally created and become something new. Something that might survive in this transformed world when traditional humanity could not. Our supplies reached final critical levels. With less than 2 weeks of sustainability remaining, we faced our decision point. Dr. Amundsen called for a final vote on whether to accept the adapted's invitation or maintain isolation until the end. Before casting my vote, I visited the observation deck one last time. The adapted had gathered as if sensing our decision point had arrived. Scout stood at the front, facing our window. When it saw me, it raised its hands in the signs Lisbeth had taught it. Life finds new paths when old ones end, Lisbeth translated, standing beside me. You preserved seeds for a future you might never see. We offer you a place in a future you never imagined. I thought about the million seed varieties sleeping in our vault, waiting for a world that might be able to sustain them again. I thought about our mission, preservation, continuity, adaptation to ensure survival. Perhaps this wasn't the future we had prepared for, but it was the future that had arrived. As I turned to cast my vote, I realized something fundamental about humanity's story. It had never been about maintaining purity or resisting change. It had been about adaptation, about finding new paths forward when old ones ended. The seeds in our vault represented thousands of years of human-guided plant evolution, species transformed to meet human needs. Perhaps now it was humanity's turn to be transformed.